Georgijs Ivanovs started the Ukraine Matters channel in 2007, and it now has garnered many, many millions of views, if not tens of millions of views. He started the channel to explain the situation surrounding the war in Ukraine in simple terms, simple and accessible terms. Like myself, he is not Ukrainian, nor is he a military expert, but he has been to Ukraine many, many times, and he has seen from east to west. He's seen many different regions of Ukraine and its diverse cultures as well. He has lots of good friends in Ukraine, as I do now as well, after 3 years of this intense support for Ukraine's independence. But his wife is Ukrainian, and so, of course, he feels incredibly connected to the invasion that has scaled up since February 2022. This is our third conversation on the channel. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you back.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here, Jonathan.
It's always stimulating, and of course, this is a very timely conversation because, of course, in almost every video I've recorded over the last couple of weeks, Kursk has figured highly, and that is because the people that tend to be on the channel get what a monumentally historic event this is, but also how strategically clever it is on multiple layers, and yet. And yet, there is so many bad takes on this, so much poor commentary throughout the media, and dare I say it, coming from people who would class themselves as military experts. Before I impose my views on this, what is your impression of Kursk? How important is it? And is it understood in the West in the way it's understood in Ukraine?
It's a very good question, and I think that's definitely the topic that has been on everyone's minds lately. We've talked about this countlessly, and I believe there is an understanding because what I did just recently, I've looked up through a lot of the military analysts, like military journals, trying to find conversations where like military people talk with the military people and they are looking at the situation. And to put it mildly, nothing short of groundbreaking the offensive as Kursk is pretty much not called, because it changed everything. It changed the narrative, the perspective, how this war is being looked at. Everyone was looking at this. We talked a little bit that everyone was looking at this situation like already solved game of chess. I'm sorry for the game analogies with the war, but sometimes it's just useful. And everyone was like, okay, I understand chess. I see where this is going. And at some point, maybe there will be some kind of negotiated solution, which was specifically the narrative that Kremlin worked for over a year to build, trying to build this perspective as like, yeah, we're going along, we're advancing, we're heading towards a very definitive ending, another Minsk agreement. And the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of our politicians in the West, and not only politicians, also certain journalists, is like, yes, we are going towards some kind of potential negotiated solutions. That's why in the latest Zelensky's interview, there was a CNN journalist that asked, like, when are you finally going to give land back to Russia so this war could end? And then Kursk, like Ukraine invades Russia. Everything, like figures flowing all across the space. All of the calculations go out the window. Different calculation of war, because now if a discussion is where does the border lies if we suddenly end the war on the lines, so does it mean that part of Russia is now going to be part of Ukraine? It raises a lot of questions and it absolutely changes the calculations, and there is a lot of inertia from that momentum that we had before, bundled very closely together with a lot of Russian propaganda. And that propaganda is coming from the Putin straight himself when he's coming to the conferences and stating, like nothing is really happening in Kursk. There is just a border incident. No, sorry. He even said that even less accurately. He said that there is a little bit of border friction happening right now in the Kursk. Ukraine, like, to put it in perspective for all the people that says like, well, let's talk facts. And facts are that Ukraine in 3 weeks has captured more territory from the Russians than Russians captured over a course of a year and a half. We are talking about the Russian advances right now on the south and so on, and that have been doing for a year. And a lot of the journalists with the narrative they're making is like, Russia has been advancing this year and a half. Yes, but less than what Ukraine did in 3 weeks. So even if we're talking facts and trying to compare apples to apples and everything, even if we don't go deep into discussing about, like, how much losses Russia incurred on trying to advance, again, less than what Ukraine did in 3 weeks, and I'm going to continue underscoring this, it is absolutely groundbreaking. And while there is some military risk associated, and recently there has been really good analysis done by Rob Lee and Michael Kaufman, where they discussed about what are the potential risks. It feels that a lot of the knee-jerk reaction from that momentum are like, oh, if Russia didn't collapse from Ukraine invading Kursk, therefore failure. It is not a failure. The Kursk operation is resounding success. The efforts that Russia put into their propaganda campaign, paying by thousands of lives and efforts and so on, just to build this specific narrative that all is happening to Minsk, is gone. It's out of the window. Ukraine changed the rules once again, and people cannot understand that. They cannot cope with that what they were expecting to happen is not going their way.
And of course, the first assumption, and this is what many people said immediately, like, well, this is going to be a raid. They're going to go in, they're going to, run around a little bit, have a little look around, and then they're going to head back home. It seemed to me right from the first hours of the information that we were seeing that you would not do this if it was just a raid, because in that case, the risks potentially do not justify the expenditure and the investment of time, machinery, and so on, and resources. We have now learned that they took JCBs along. So the intention, as I suspected all along, was to dig in. That, to my mind, means that this is just a bridgehead. You dig in, you hold the bridgehead, you keep it through winter. They must be intending that this is going to remain something that they really get sort of stuck into, use it to attrit Russians, use the natural landscape so that Russians break themselves on, the River Sim and other natural fortifications. But it's also a bridgehead for probing further, bringing heavy machinery in, bringing air defense closer to the Russian missile sites, and potentially advancing. Whether that's in the north or the south, we just don't know. But it creates possibilities. Is that the kind of impression you had? And did you really see much commentary talking in the direction?
Yeah. Yes, this is the vision that I have, though I didn't really see that it was an incursion right from the get-go. I have sometimes people reporting to me. Unfortunately, the popularity also brings people reporting on stuff on the ground, which I do not advise. If you are a Ukrainian military, do not send me classified information. I ask of you. It's like I'm a civilian. There is zero reason for me to know any classified information, especially if it's an operation. Like, I know what's OPSEC, and I didn't explain a lot. Obviously, thanks for it. But please don't send to journalists classified information. But more importantly, during this offensive, if we're talking purely military, if we are not talking about the political impact, the strategic impact, if we're talking about what does it mean for the forces on the ground, there is obviously a discussion about, yes, they were planning to dig in. And there are two things that I think it's important to factor. Factor number one, the River Seine that right now Ukraine is trying to get towards. So they were able to destroy all of the bridges that were across the River Seine, and they were able to close a significant area, about 700 square kilometers, with Russians being on one side trapped by Ukrainians on the west and Ukrainians on the east, and towards the north you have a relatively wide river. It varies from 30 to 80 meters in width, and they are trying to kind of cross back, but it is unsustainable. So it is expected that within the next couple of weeks, Ukrainians will collapse that pocket and they will exit to the River Seine. So in a tactical perspective, their exit to the River Seine, together with their preparing of their positions, digging in, it actually creates quite a nice barrier for Ukrainians to hold. Arguably better than they were holding before with regards to the border of Ukraine. So it is a more convenient position to hold against the potential Russian advances. Second part, Russians were very, very arrogant. they were extremely arrogant. They were greedy and arrogant to an extent that they basically took almost all of the capable defenses from the border and sent them towards the east and the south of Ukraine to attack Ukrainian positions and essentially dominate the area. Whereas Ukraine, because they have the threat of Belarus, it's not a big threat, but there is a threat. So some forces need to be in the area. Because there was an Kharkiv incursion just recently, because there is some concentration of Russian forces, because they are repairing, they have logistics hubs, so they can ability to kind of throw around certain forces. They do have that. They were forced to have certain forces in the area in any case. But Russians didn't. Russia says, well, we're not going to attack from that direction. Therefore, we can just put some conscripts and some forces that are not ready to fight in that area. Not anymore. Now, if there's going to be like a potential for Ukrainian incursion, maybe in Kursk, maybe in Bryansk area, somewhere close there, then it creates problems for Russians because now they also will need to have capable forces also on the border. So while there are risks with regards to like, well, you know, it's a bigger border to hold. They're going to be occupying territory. There's going to be an issues with that. Yes, but also that was the situation before, except beforehand, when Ukrainian forces on the border were attacked, the shells, the mines, the destruction was raining down Ukrainian territory. Now it's Russians destroying Russian cities. And that is military doctrine 101. You open any kind of military strategy book and it's like, as a defensive party, your goal as fast as possible is to move the war from fighting on your territory to the territory of your enemy. It's as simple as that.
And of course, Russia probably believes, first of all, they underestimate Ukrainians. And from what we were talking about earlier and what some of my recent guests have said, everybody seems to, unfortunately, underestimate Ukrainians unless they've lived there, unless they've immersed themselves in Ukrainian culture, unless they have trained Ukrainians over the last decade. I mean, these people, like Ben Hodges and so on, do not seem to fall into that trap of assuming that Ukrainians are going to fail or be weaker than they actually are. What Ukrainians, it seems to me, have done here is also combine their understanding of Western maneuver warfare with their understanding of the Russian mindset. Because again, something else that doesn't quite come through, I think, in much of the analysis is what a seismic shock this is for the Russian elites, so-called elites. Russia has not had a foreign army on its soil for more than 80 years. And Putin has based his regime on the idea that he will bring security. People have traded freedom for security. That is the deal. Don't get involved in politics. Don't consider you have any agency in the political sphere, but we will let you get on with your lives, earn money. You don't have to, you're totally absolved of that. And we'll commit crimes in your names, but don't worry. We'll, you're complicit, but we'll absolve you, and it's fine. You can go and live your happy lives and forget about it. Bringing the war to Russia means that Russians can no longer stick their heads in the sand in this manner.
Yes, there are two moments to this. The moment number one is the Putin as a strongman narrative. What Putin has been selling both to the Western world and to his dictatorial friends is that what is happening is a vassal uprising, so to say. A subsidiary of Russia that Putin convinced everyone, again, that is supposedly Ukrainians are Russians and they're just don't know it yet, and it's just us basically making sure that our internal vassals just come back to heel. That's the narrative that Kremlin has been building. And a lot of this time, that's why, that was the dominant perspective for a lot, that whatever is happening in Ukraine, maybe it's not going according to plan. Maybe the 3-day special operation didn't succeed. But Putin said, no, we have it going to plan. Look at the last year and a half. We have been advancing the year and a half. It is slowly but surely, it's a done deal. So don't worry, guys. This is just one bad apple in my garden that I just need to take care of, and then it's going to be Fine. Gabrielius Landsbergis, the foreign minister of Lithuania, stated very well that incursion into Kursk, into Russia proper territory, that is a weakness. That is when not internal conflict, that is when the picture that Putin has built started to crumble. Does it mean that it's going to collapse soon? No. Does it mean that his friends are going to turn on him? No. There is still a lot of pressure for Putin to continue going, and there's a lot of pros for him to continue going, mostly because I feel there is still not a vision of Ukrainian victory in the Western world, but it's a whole another bag of worms. So for Putin, it's painful. That is why he's trying so very hard to build this narrative, like just border incursion, just a little bit of border friction. Just give us some time, and then it's going to be all settled. But it is a dent, the first dent. I know for us it doesn't feel like it. For us it felt like, like when Ukrainians were not captured, that's it. Like that the Russians were lost. But that is not what he was doing to his friends. It's like, no, we were just not serious back then, we're just joking around. Now we're gonna do it seriously. And when he does seriously and still fails, that is bad. That is weakness. Second point, for the Russian society is very docile. They are forgiving their tsars, their dictators, everything. They're forgiving any kind of act of cruelty, genocide, extermination of cities, like everything that they do internally to their own population, everything is forgiven. Except for one thing, weakness. Weakness has never been kind to Russian tsars. Every time there was weakness, that was what eventually brought the tsars down one way or another. And that is, again, the problem for the Russian society. And even for the Russian society, the society that is supposedly this much jaded from the war, like they don't really see this. Like we see this from people that are talking in Sudzha, the town that is the close to Ukraine, that Ukrainian armed forces captured right now. When the journalists are coming to that town and asking is like, so what do you think about war? And they state, well, the war started on the 8th of August, 2024. They don't even realize it's the border town to Ukraine. For them, it was never there. It was never there. They say, for us, war started on the 8th of August. We didn't even realize that there was something happening in Ukraine. But now, there are bits and pieces. It was a very sharp reaction to one very specific things, the conscripts. So in Russian military system, there is something that they call the conscripts or prizivniki, which is about 19, like young guys, about 19 to, I believe now it's 30 years old. I know it's not already young guys, but it's a wide spectrum, but mostly it's the young guys. They are being called for the mandatory 1-year service into the Russian army. These conscripts, they were notoriously used during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan for their assaults, and they died in droves in Afghanistan, and it caused a lot of uproar, and it was a major blow for the weakening Soviet Union, and internally it is considered that it was one of the helping pushes on what helped the collapse of the Soviet Union from inside. So these conscripts, they were not being used in the war beforehand. They were always working on the back lines. They were preparing supply lines, loading trucks, doing stuff like this, and guarding border regions. Now with Ukrainian incursion, not only they were able to capture a lot of these conscripts right away, hundreds of them, but they were also now considering internally, because Russia, as much as we got dust, like this magic dust blown into our eyes, stating that the Russian manpower resource is infinite, the reality is it is far from it. Russians are actually struggling getting more people into military. And what they are trying to do right now to substitute this, they're trying to plug in the holes with these conscripts. So a lot of the forces that are coming in right now to the Kursk area to defend against the advancing Ukrainian armed forces are these specific conscripts that are fighting and dying. And that, even with the small amount that was there, already caused significant shockwaves within the Russian society. And again, I'm not expecting the Russian society to do anything. I'm just stating that is another painful coin that is going to help accumulate, and potentially at some point it will tip the scale internally, together with continuous success of the Ukrainian armed forces.
And this is something I've been sort of saying on the channel, and this is one of the reasons I listed out. I listed out all the possible reasons why Ukraine launched the Kursk offensive. We'll come to informational warfare because, again, I think one of the mistakes that many Western analysts make is they'll look at a single layer of expertise. It's military tactics, but they'll ignore that this is a multi-layered strategy. Information is important. We'll come to that in a second. What is important here is exactly what you're talking to, which is that if Putin is going to be able to go to China and allies and say, no, I'm executing this war seriously, he will need to mobilize and go for full mobilization. It's not serious until he takes that step. He may well be waiting for the November election in the US to see whether Trump gets in. If Trump gets in, it's been speculated he may not have to go for full mobilization because he will assume that Ukraine will no longer be getting the munitions that it needs. If Trump doesn't get in, and of course at the moment it's on a bit of a knife edge, but if he doesn't get in, Putin may well realize that he is forced to go there. It seems that the propagandists may be gearing up to prepare the population for that mobilization that's coming. Do you think Ukrainians, as part of their strategic thinking and planning, had this as one of the important reasons why they launched the offensive? It's to push the Russian system into collapse.
I mean, that's the only way that you win, right? It's attacking on all fronts. And information plays an incredibly important space. And it actually pains me so much that it is still not understood that Russia is waging full-scale information warfare against our media, against our social medias, against abusing our freedom of speech. It is still not understood. There has been recently like a European Union action plan how to fight Russian propaganda. And you know what they said, how to fight it? They stated, we're just going to inform the society that, Russian propaganda is active. And that's it. That's the last point of that plan. So we're still perceiving like this is like some kind of silliness, that democracies will just overcome this, that if the people will have free access to information, then they will eventually come down to the correct conclusion that we all know, supposedly. Like, it's self-understanding. For 30 years, Russian had access to free and open internet to see all of the free information that they could have ever wanted. Where are they now? We're now calling them propaganda victims and stating it's like, oh, that's just because they're living in a state. It's the same thing. Just having access to free information does not protect us from the propaganda that is working specifically to target you, to specifically target the media and make sure that media starts asking these questions like, oh, but was the Kursk offensive successful or not? Let's talk about this. Let's get a couple of guys that can discuss different side views. It's like, no, it was. It's a complete disaster for Russians. Oh, but Putin is not saying that it's a disaster. Yes, it's a propaganda narrative because he knows how much the information is important. And that is crucial. And we're not understanding this yet. And I believe Ukrainians do understand this. One of the reasons is that we see they've tried the positive campaign to build the hype campaign for their offensive, which backfired spectacularly against the Ukrainian offensive in 2023, I believe, the summer offensive. Sorry, the years are a little bit blending for me. Every day is just the picture of horrific, like every day is just so horrifying. It's just, how are we still in this? The offensive failed, and because there was built this narrative of information, now Ukrainians are treating everything differently. Now it's like everything is secret. For example, Kursk offensive, we still, up to this point, do not really see any major videos from the Ukrainian armed forces. We see pictures here and there. We see certain videos that have been approved, for example, interaction with some of the locals, showing a captured tank here and there. But the normally available flow of media from Ukrainian armed forces from that direction is absent. Absolutely absent. Everything is more like a stock footage. So Ukrainians are planning and controlling the information space very well. And that's one major strong point that really gets me optimistic, is that I believe that Syrskyi, the new general in command of Ukrainian armed forces, actually all of Ukrainian defense forces, he is known to be a mathematician of war. He's known to be a person that prepares very, very elaborative plans that are looking for the possibilities that the enemy can do. And the fact that everything is in such a tight control so far shows me only one thing, that they know what they're doing. And Syrskyi stated that they do have a plan for victory. And Zelensky also stated that he will present that plan to the allies in September. So we'll see what the allies are going to say. And so far, everything looks very, very optimistic. I don't have a speck of doubt that they don't know what they're doing.
And I would absolutely agree. It seems that a lot of planning, huge amount of detailed planning, has gone into this. It seems that they didn't confide in allies, therefore it was able to be kept secret, and it was sprung on the press in a way that no one was expecting it. Therefore, there's no disappointment. And in fact, we've seen an extraordinary uptick in both not just interest in Ukraine, but in the US, where support for Ukraine in polls was beginning to flag. It has turned that around. And on both Republican and Democrat sides, you now have a higher percentage of people who say that Ukraine deserves victory and deserves support. So this is an extraordinary success, which again, unfortunately, seems to be largely ignored from various analysis. But clearly detailed planning went into it. It also suggests to me that that gives a good hint that this may well be a multi-stage operation with some more dramatic and unexpected twists in this story to come. What are the chances, though, that Ukraine presents this plan to the US administration, and, the polite version is they fall off their chairs. The rude version is, they soil the bed, because they are extremely cautious. There is an extreme managerial mindset in the Washington administration, in Berlin, and in many other important capitals. The appetite for this level of boldness seems to me isn't there. What's going to happen when this plan is presented?
Yeah, it's the level of taking risks that is unprecedented for our current elected class of politicians. I've stated from basically the start of the full-scale invasion that our current politicians are not up to the task. What was achieved, while it is attributed in a lot of sense to a lot of the names, the political names, I truly believe that it was a grassroots movement. I truly believe that majority of what was achieved was because of the pressure extorted on the politicians from the grounds up. Because we need to be honest. We need to be very, very honest when we talk to each other. What was given to Ukraine and is still being given is specs. It's garbage. It's barely noticeable. And I know that a lot of people are taking it very, very sensitive. Like a lot of people in Germany, it's like, oh, we're number 2 supporters of Ukraine by the total amount. Or people in the US was like, whoa, we send like 60 billions. My problem is that we're sounding these numbers and it's like 60 billions. And it's like, whoa, that's a lot of money every year. It's not. It's just factually not. We've sent to Ukraine relatively low flow of equipment. Majority of equipment that we sent was either older equipment that already served its term, or equipment that required heavy refurbishing. A lot of money was invested specifically into into own production to make sure that we grow our own internal defense companies. The fact that Europe doesn't supply Ukraine with ammunition shells is talking more about the absolutely degraded defense policies of European Union and unpreparedness to any kind of warfare. So the fact that when the stocks came in and we needed to count how much ammunition shells we're having, and it's like, well, we have for maybe a week of fighting or something. That's not good. That is not good at all. And it talks more about us as we're ready to defense. And I'm happy that we're scaling up. But the main point is that I'm talking Europe because I'm a European and I'm here, is that even the countries that are doing a lot for Ukraine, the life in those countries barely changed. We don't feel the sense that there is some kind of a large-scale war that is happening right in our neighborhood and is about to descend on us if we do not help Ukraine. We do not feel, the majority of our population, I'm pretty sure you've met people that just like, I don't know, Ukraine this, Ukraine that. I was like, oh yeah, it's really sorry that's like what's happening. But what is like that? It wasn't Russia just like advancing there for like a year. It was like the people that are just switched off. The community for people that are actually actively supporting Ukraine is relatively small. The general media is very absent on this question. And when we're talking about the levels of support from US, then it's been turned in a political game where it should never been there. And when we're talking about 60 billions, it is, I believe, what is less than 0.1% of the US GDP that has been donated. And it's like, and I need to be actually very careful with words here, because not donated, invested into own production to send old rusted stuff that was serving their terms, the M113s, the Bradleys from the older versions, the older versions that were used in the Desert Storm, I believe it is the older war. So not the newest types of Bradleys, but the older ones, they've been sending in. F-16s are not coming from US despite they're there. 31 Abrams tanks. So we need to be very honest with ourselves that none of us is doing even closely to Ukraine. So then when we're asking is like, well, where is the victory, Zelensky? Well, I can only state what Zelensky stated in the first day. It's like, the fight is there. I need ammunition, not a ride. And we're not providing the ammunition, at least not nearly enough. Thankfully.
When you look at the Second World War, you just look at some of the figures, not just of domestic, production in the USSR, France, UK. Obviously, at some point, the production of France ceased because they were invaded and it stopped. But the production in the USSR was vast. Then you look at what the US sent to the USSR. It's not 41 Bradleys. It's tens and tens and tens of thousands of vehicles, transports, rail wagons, tens of thousands of aircraft. I mean, you're talking war on an incredible scale. And here you've got Ukraine, which is undersupplied and undersupported, has managed to attrit what is estimated to be at least 50% or more of the world's second largest military. It's an extraordinary triumph, which is constantly underrated.
The scale of this war is constantly being underrated. And I want this not to be offensive to anyone and so on. But I've heard someone say this, and this is like a little bit of an anecdote, so don't think too much into it. Some person expressed saying, it was like, oh my God, if Iran and it would invade into Israel, then we will see a war where Ukraine would fade in comparison. And that took me by shock. That took me by such a huge shock, because it just painted, and that is a person that I know is more or less understanding that there's the conflict in Ukraine, that there's a full-scale war. So it's not completely devolved from this perspective. But the absolute misunderstanding of the scale of war is absent. The understanding that the border, the line, the conflict line between Ukraine and Russia is a continent spanning. Like if you put it in a line, it goes almost through the whole Europe. Like if you just start in Spain, it's going to end up somewhere beyond Poland, I truly believe. And I'm taking it from my hand. It's enormous. It's continental spending. So the fact that Ukraine is just like looking at the map, people just do not realize just what does it mean when it's like hundreds of thousands of troops are operating? What does it mean when there are Russian stockpiles, which are being emptied, but we're seeing thousands. It's the stockpiles that the Soviet Union, the world's second superpower, was preparing to fight the rest of the world for 50 years, is now being, they're not the newest equipment, obviously, but Ukraine is also not fighting with the newest equipment. See my last point. But these stockpiles from over 50 years of overproduction, slave laboring Soviet population just to produce these tanks. The tens of thousands of vehicles are now being dumped on one European country that we're barely supplying weapons with. The fact that Ukraine is not only kicking, but now invading Russia is beyond glorious. It is incredible. And I'm hoping that at some point there will be someone with a vision, with the ability to convey that vision, because right now my heart bleeds every time I'm trying to explain just how important and monumental it is for all of us that Ukraine succeeds. And they say something like, yeah, but like Iran and Israel. Like Israel is barely one region of Ukraine. It barely one, without even talking about the people. And again, don't think too much into the Southeast. I'm just talking about the scale.
Indeed, and the scale of the Iranian army is frankly, it's not comparable. You know, it would just be a rounding error if you compared it to the kind of armor and men under arms that Russia had before the full-scale invasion. Unfortunately, Russia is throwing an awful lot. However, it still has a lot in its armory, and the red lines that are still in place prevent Ukraine from taking up the launch sites for Shaheeds and the jets, especially that are launching glide bombs. We're now seeing Kharkiv. There was a pause when Russian forces were pushed back north of Kharkiv. Now they have resumed their assault, one would assume, under direct orders from Putin, who needs to see revenge taken for his bruised ego and the losses he's incurring. They are now sending glide bombs into Kharkiv once more, devastating, untargeted. They do not discriminate. Russia, of course, doesn't really care and doesn't typically, target military targets with these weapons anyway. But this is a war crime on an extraordinary scale, and we're starting to see the tragic consequences of this. Ukraine seems to understand that this will not stop until it's stopped. There is no magic negotiation formula. There's no magic words that will get Russia to stop this. There's no Danegeld. There's no kind of bribe we can give them, monetary bribe or promises of anything that will stop this aggression. Ukraine understands that. How do you think they're going to deal with this if these red lines remain in place? It is absolutely possible, unfortunately, and again, apologies to my US audience who are listening. Some Democrats get very chippy about this. It's quite possible that because of internal political considerations, the US will not lift these red lines prior to the election. Now, sorry, US friends, that is morally bankrupt, it's disgusting, it's weak, and it's obscene. And that's what's coming from Biden. It is beyond disgusting. It's creating a killing zone, a murder field, and it's giving Russia impunity. Ukraine, at some point, cannot just defer to US weakness.
Yeah, I want to tackle this on a very specific level. Like, firstly, a very good point that you raised, like just that how much damage and so on is being done. And I want to applaud for every person that is still tuned in into this war, that still care, that watches this video. It's very hard to follow. That's why, like, for example, I am very time more upbeat because I see that this is a marathon, not a sprint. If we just think about that, all of the darkness, all of the gloom, it's just gonna burn us alive because we care. And it's great to care, but we need to be sure that we are also can do it long term. So please always take care of your personal health and mental health as well. It's very, very important. But most importantly, when you're talking about these red lines allowing Ukraine to strike, for me, while I think it will allow Ukraine to do a lot, it will allow Ukraine to do a lot of capabilities, it is not something that will win Ukraine the war. More important point that I think a lot of people miss, maybe just a couple of them, for example, General Bat Hodges talked about this a lot, is that this is principle. The fact that there is some kind of a red line, the fact that there is some kind of restriction of Ukraine, that there is some kind of doubt about what we should not allow Ukraine and so on, is us trying to exert control on us, our supposed ally. It's lack of vision for what is the victory, where do we get the victory and how do we get there. It shows the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of the perspective of what to do with Russia and how to respond to this threat. That is why I'm stating that the current class of politician needs a bump up, and it's up to us, the electorate, to make sure that we vote for people that understand why democracy is important, why democracy needs to be preserved. We need politicians that will start responding to these threats without looking back to what Russia does. The fact that, for example, Kaja Kallas, the Estonian prime minister, was shunned from the NATO general secretary position, also showing, even right now, people are looking at what Poland is saying. People are looking at what the Baltics are saying. People are looking at what Finland is saying. People are looking at what the Denmark and Sweden is saying. And all of these countries, there's one thing that is very closely tying them up. They're stating, no, we need to let Ukraine win. We need to make sure Ukraine wins. And instead, we're seeing the US-German alliance of stating is like, well, let's not go too crazy here, okay? Right? And that timidness, that inability to take action at the face of adversity is killing us as an alliance, is killing Ukrainian trust in us, and is dooming us to have these conflicts and challenges and problems hunt us now and hunt our kids in the coming decades. And we should respond now while we have the chance.
I mean, one of the topics we haven't touched on too much is that you have a challenge of mobilization on actually both sides, it seems. Ukraine, I think General Zaluzhny was pushing hard for greater mobilization, greater speed, greater depth to mobilization prior to his removal. I understand that it took a long time for the mobilization law to get through, and Ukraine, probably rightly in the circumstances, doesn't actually talk about the success or failure of mobilization. Of course, doesn't give any figures about mobilization and how it's going. Russia has chosen to do a what's called a Russian skryty mobilization, which is basically a hidden mobilization. But there is a lot of research focused on the number of bodies that it is managing to scrape together from across its empire and regions. And it seems that despite full mobilization, Russia is claiming to scrape together around 30,000 a month. The real figure may be somewhere between 10 and 20,000. It's been estimated. I guess we maybe shouldn't speculate as to whether this is sustainable on the Ukrainian side because we don't have enough figures to really say that one way or another. But Russia certainly has a problem, and it has a problem if it starts pulling people from the industrialized, more sort of educated cities like St. Petersburg, Moscow, Ekaterinburg. Do you think Putin's going to have to press that button at some point, given how many forces are being attrited on the front?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect Russia running out of manpower anytime soon. That's seemingly not the resource. As I said, there are these coins that are accumulating on one scale, one side of the scale, and obviously mobilization will be another bunch of these sort of say additional weights kicking in on that scale, and potentially it can tip. But let's just say after Prigozhin's attempt of a coup, I just feel that you cannot trust Russians to do anything right. So, with a big of a joke, saying this, that I do not believe that expecting anything from the Russian population, I cannot call them the nation. Sorry, it's more of a just population living in a territory. I don't expect them to respond to Putin in any kind of forced way. I think Putin has enough levers to execute forced mobilization. The tactic of forced assaults has been already practiced and perfected in the Russian military. So if they get 100,000 Russian troops, if they rile them up, lock them up in cells, and then just give them some kind of ammunition and then send them over towards Ukrainian positions, Russians will be just good little doggies and continue going forward attacking Ukrainians. We've been seeing this non-stop for the last 2 years. There's been stories after stories after stories, and this is not me pretending something or willing something. So I would not look at this. The problem is different. The problem is that Russia is running out of equipment. That is the actual story. Russia is really struggling with their equipment problem. They are not having as much armor as they had before, and their production rates are very, very low. So they are resorting to a lot of these attacks with a lot of the infantry and with the help of aviation. So it's a combo that seems to be working, and Ukrainians are looking how to solve this problem. And if war has shown anything, that this problem will be solved. And I believe overall the fact that Russia will be running lower and lower of their hard equipment, as much as it possible for Russian conscripts and forced mobilized to run in the hundreds against the Bradleys. If the supplies of Bradleys continue, and if the Russians will not have armor on their sides, at some point it will definitely tip the scale, and we already see this working for Ukrainian advance. To put it like very simply, one note, like if you have a fast-moving advance like we saw in Kursk, if you just have a lot of bodies that are defending it, that means that these bodies are just going to be good for laying down on the road and being taken captives.
That could be more optics, which are dreadful for Putin. And this, for those who are wondering why Putin put the FSB in charge of the operation to retake Kursk, that tells you something, that he is expecting mass surrender. Why else would you put secret police in with your army unless you're going to basically use Stalinist tactics to force people to move forward and make it clear that they're going to die one way or the other, either in the assault or in their refusal to take part in the assault. It is, of course, horrifically cynical from every single level. I think initially, it was treated by some as something of a joke and a sign of his incompetence and desperation. Unfortunately, I think it's a sign of something rather more sinister. Another aspect, and I don't know if you watch his videos, but one of the guests on the channel I have, Konstantin, has recently been on holiday with his family. As many know, he's not. He left Russia during the first mobilization in 2022, but he's recently been mixing with a lot of Russians who are actually on holiday and, of course, returning to their jobs and their lives in Russia. And because people who have money to go to a foreign resort, wherever that might be, I'm not going to name where it is, they're going to have reasonably well-paid middle-class jobs. And he made a point of going out and talking to them. And I think the results of those conversations is perhaps for you and I not unexpected, but certainly for him was shocking and deeply disheartening. And That is that the majority of people you spoke to either didn't want to be broached on the subject of Ukraine at all, or would simply say, "Well, this affects me in no way. It doesn't affect my security, doesn't affect my lifestyle, doesn't affect my job," and he didn't get any sense that a single one of what I assume as many dozens of people he spoke to had any sense that Russia was in any kind of risk itself from internal stability, instability, and so on. A historical footnote, you can read many such reports and accounts by people in the elite in 1917 saying that revolution is impossible in Russia and everything's fine and lovely and all the rest of it. From your knowledge of Russian culture and, the sort of not just brainwashing, because I think that's a sort of get out of jail free card. It's far more complex than just brainwashing, but from decades of political in apathy and inertia. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by his results whatsoever. So we need to obviously understand that dictatorial regimes, they are firm but brittle. Dictatorial regimes never decline noticeably. They're always seemingly good and fine, and then within maybe a year or sometimes even months, they suddenly just experience extreme waves of turmoil, and then they just collapse, whether one reason or another. Oftentimes it's connected to the army riots. I've looked this and followed some of the bloggers that talked about this, and I failed to see any kind of potential like civil uprising that on their own has brought an end to any dictatorship. Never saw this. It's always had a strong effect in the military. So if there ever is going to be something with Russia, I do not expect this to be with the society. So society, as I said, is docile, and for them the war is not happening. Like if you ask Russians the questions, do you think that's bad that Ukrainians captured Kursk? They will say yes. This war needs to be over. We just need to finally win and then get done with Ukraine. So they will also answer that they're just waiting when Putin is going to actually start fighting for real. So that's also the common answer that I'm hearing from them, saying this like, well, like when are we finally going to start? Which is maybe a reference to the nuclear weapons or something, because in a lot of the Russian minds is the nuclear weapons are in the same perspective with a lot of the commentators that are afraid of Russia using nuclear weapons on my videos. Their perspective is like Russia uses nukes, then it's ... Russia wins, and there is no in between. So there is nothing, the consequences, the no steps in between. What's the problems that use of the nuclear weapons would bring or anything. And it's the same of a lot of Russian mind. You can say it's propaganda. You can say it's just being made like this, or it's just because it's in Russia. Whatever the case, the fact is there that this is the way of thinking. It's like we just need to start fighting and then we win. They cannot even fathom the perspective that Ukraine might prevail, that Ukraine can actually go further, that they can capture more Russian territory, that they can push the Russian forces out, that they can actually counterattack, which they can if we supply them with the weapons. Ukrainians have shown time and time again that if they're provided enough resources, they will be able to do stuff. And I'm really happy to hear that now there is a concrete plan, and I'm hoping that that concrete plan is what will help Russian society maybe at some point, either because it's going to be the Russian military that suddenly decides to act against Putin, or finally the Ukrainian military will bring the change towards the Russian population. Whatever the case, I do believe that it's going to be a mix of both military and civilian action. And when I'm saying civilian action, I want to be very clear. It's not the Russian opposition. The control of the Russian opposition that has been exchanged recently, it is not them. To put it very simply, because it's a big topic, so the Russian opposition, they are still disconnecting their views with the views of majority of Russians. They are still talking about Russians as always like, oh, majority of Russians don't support this, or it's like they're actually against Putin. We just need to kind of get in touch with them and so on. And there obviously is not a lot of truth in that statement, but the main is not that point. The main point is that they're disconnecting the current Russian society that is hands deep, grease elbows deep into building weapons of destruction, calling for destruction of Ukraine, paying taxes in a country that aggressively invades its neighbors and so on. They are disconnecting themselves from that society. They are proposing essentially a way out, a cop-out, stating that's like, no. It's like, it wasn't you. You were never wrong. It was all Putin. They're proposing a way out. And I believe that it's going to be devastating for the Russian society long term, that if they will never reflect on what Russia has done and the scale of suffering. And if they don't reflect, then it's just going to happen again.
This is absolutely fascinating because it fits in with one of I think, the main social contracts, unspoken, that Putin has with the people, which is, we all know terrible things happened in the past. And it's very painful to think about these things. It's even more painful and irritating to actually have to deal with it. Things like the Red Terror, Stalinism, etc. Well, tell you what, you don't have to worry your head about that anymore. I'm going to give you absolution from all these sins. This is where the sort of God Tsar comes in. You will hand over authority to me, and you no longer have to feel a sense of guilt for any of this. You no longer have to take responsibility either for the past or the present. You don't really have to think too much about the future. Just live in the present. The Russian opposition seems to be offering the same thing, absolution from Russia's sins. In that sense, it fits with the historical pattern entirely. And unfortunately, from what Konstantin said, from the many videos we've seen of prisoners interviewed by Zolkin and others, there is a population in Russia who is only too willing and ready to heap blame for all of this on Tsar Putin and to say, well, we couldn't do anything about it, but we were all opposed, or we didn't know, or no one told us, or whatever. This is exactly a recurring pattern of Russian history, I think.
Yeah, and I think the key word here is agency. And if a person wants to draw at least anything from this conversation, if it's one thing, it's agency. The biggest difference for anyone that is still doubting about whether Ukrainians and Russians are different is that Ukrainians are self-realized own agency as a nation, as a people, as a party in defining their own future. Russians are not there. I'm hoping that they will come back. Like, it's my biggest hope. Like, people think like I'm very hard on Russia and I want, I don't know, all of the Russians destroyed. No, mostly I just want occupiers to be destroyed. And I want Russians to figure out what they did wrong and find out how they should not do it again. I want Russians to find their agency, because right now it is sorely lacking.
And I think we'll have to continue that in a future conversation, but it seems to me, examining the Russian opposition, they are not offering agency. They are not acting in a way that they themselves understand what agency is. And I think something maybe we can explore in a future conversation is the reaction to the arrest of Pavel Durov, which I'm going to examine in a video, which again, it screams everything about privilege and, their individual perceived rights are being infringed. It says nothing about rule of law, agency, and responsibility. I think it's a fascinating topic there to see actually that the Russian opposition are not a million miles away from how the regime manipulates people's psychology. But this has been an absolutely thrilling conversation. I'm sure we could probably keep talking all night, but in order to keep the audience with us, let's schedule another one and we'll keep this going.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I wish you all the best, and I congratulate you on the success your channel has had and is having, and you're doing an incredibly important job. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to your audience.
Thank you. And likewise, if people aren't subscribed to your channel, I absolutely recommend it. Hopefully, people have seen and heard the extraordinarily, I say, insightful and strong views that you've got, and will subscribe to your channel as well. Thanks so much. Huge pleasure.
Perfect. Take care.